Good evening, everybody. Hello, thanks for coming out. We all here appreciate the interest that you've shown in the future of our city by being with us this evening for a discussion about the finances here in Seven Hills. Before I begin, I want to go around the room and introduce some of the current and former Seven Hills officials who are with us this evening. First up front, I think everybody knows former Mayor Jerry Traffus, Councilman Tim Frondorf, former Councilman Joe Trippi, I hope I'm not missing anybody, former Councilman Nino Ceriti, our Council President Michelle Ernst, Councilman Tom Snitsky, in the back, Councilman Mike Barth. Seated next to him is our Finance Director Jack Johnson, our Law Director Rich Pignatello, and Lieutenant Jeff Gizmala seated next to him, and Councilwoman Carol Lechnar. Seated up at the table here is our Service Director Jack Moga. I hope I've caught everybody. Is there anybody that I missed? I'm sorry, this thing is cutting out. We're going to have an ongoing problem with this evening. I'll do my best to just kind of talk loud. At your tables, you'll find two cards. One card is intended. Thanks. One card is intended for questions that you might want to submit as the evening progresses for us to answer here this evening. The other, the blue card, is if you have other questions that you don't necessarily have for this evening, but that you want us to consider in the future, or to give you some sort of response down the road. Can you hear me in the back if I talk without the mic?
Barely.
Okay. All right, I'll do my best.
Then move up.
There you go.
Yeah, then move up. There you go. Thank you, whoever said that. The finances of the city. Those of you who have read, oh, I'm sorry, I missed introducing Jen Berger, our rec director, and Joe Hotchkiss, our deputy finance director, Rich Vittardi, building inspector, and I got Rich Pignatello. Sorry. If you've read the newsletter, you know that, at least in my opinion, this has been a tough 3.5 years. We've done quite a bit to turn the city's finances around from where we were back in the 2008 to 2010 timeframe, but there's a lot more work yet to be done. For 2015 and arguably into 2016, we are in relatively sound footing. The problems arise in the 16 to 19 timeframe, when we're going to have to address continuing expenses and debt that we know is coming and that cannot be met under the current revenue structure that we have here in Seven Hills. If at any point in time you can't hear me in the back, please raise your hand and I'll do my best to talk a little louder. So there are significant challenges facing the city in 2016 and thereafter. I want to point out, I know it's said a lot, that cities and municipalities and government structures need to be run like a business. Well, I have to respectfully disagree with that. A city is not a for-profit entity. A municipality must provide a certain base level of services and other requirements for its residents, irrespective of whether they can be paid for and irrespective of whether they make a profit or lose money. So to characterize a city as a profit and loss entity doesn't really get to the core of what a municipality really must do in order to operate to the best benefit of its residents. So we're not a business and we're not a financial institution. We are designed to provide services to our residents in as economical way that we can. So let's talk a little bit about where we are with the general fund balances. You've seen this chart, if you've seen the newsletter already. The vertical red line is the dividing line between the former Benkowski administration and my coming into office in December of 2011. As you can see, in December of 2011, we closed that year with a general fund balance, a cash balance of about $1.5 million. As I'm about to explain this evening through some of the changes, modifications, cuts, adjustments we made in the last 3 years, we've been able to build that balance up such that we've closed out calendar 2014 with a balance of just over $3.9 million in the general fund. Thank you. Now the general fund balance, old-fashioned. The general fund balance is not the only cash reserve that the city maintains. I'm about to tell you a little bit down the road here about our debt restructuring that our debt restructuring that we did a few years ago. And as part of that process, we started salting away additional monies of about $250,000 a year into our bond retirement fund. The chart on the left represents when I came into office in 2011. The balance in the bond retirement fund at that time was $258,000. That's money that was set away on an annual basis to cover debt as it came due in the succeeding year. The $1.5 million in the taller blue rectangle is that general fund balance I alluded to before when I came into office. In the 2014 side, this $3.9 million is the general fund balance that we've accumulated since I came into office. And the approximately $1.7 million is the money that we've been accumulating in that bond retirement fund to the tune of about $250,000 a year that would have otherwise gone into the general fund, but instead of putting in the general fund, we put it into that fund so that it was specifically dedicated to pay down the debt that we know that we have, and it's coming. So that as we closed out 2014, between these two funds, our cash reserves now are $5.6 million as opposed to $1.8 million at the end of 2011. Now that's a good number, there's no doubt about it. It came with a lot of sacrifice, a lot of adjustments, a lot of cuts that we had to make here. We had to restructure our debt. We sold our cell phone tower revenue. I'm going to talk a little bit about all that. And so that's why I say for 2015 and 2016, we're in relatively good shape. This was all part of a plan that was put in place in 2010 through 2012. The problems are going to arise 16, 17, 19, and the years out, which I'm about to show you. One of the biggest things that we had to address were the subsidies at the recreation center. When the recreation center was built, there was a forecast that it could absorb about $250,000 in subsidies from the general fund and it would operate smoothly. Well, in the years before I took office, as demonstrated by the taller part of the red area at the bottom of the chart, we were running general fund subsidies anywhere from $414,000 to just under $400,000. So roughly about $1.2 million in those 3 years out of the general fund just to cover operating costs at the rec center. What we've done since then, in 2012, 13, and 14, due to some of the cuts and adjustments we did and some of the sacrifices that were made and do some great work by Jen Berger, our rec director, we brought those subsidies down for those 3 years to $75,000, $24,000, and $45,000 respectively. So that we are running now probably about as lean as we can get it. There are some additional things we could do to enhance revenue. There's always the outside chance that we might be able to break even there, but we have yet been able to punch through that. However, if you look at the 13-year average, even with those high years during the Benkowski administration, you take that roughly $3 million in subsidies that we paid out of the general fund, divide that by 13, and you see that the subsidy now, with these last 3 years of cuts that we've made, is actually below the $250,000 projection that was made back when the rec center was open. So we're running pretty much right on the money with respect to the projections, even though for the last 3 years, we've been beating that projection pretty handily. So, going back to why did the general fund balance go down in the past decade? Why did we go down to that 1.5 million? Well, we all know about the bad national economic conditions. Everybody's struggling. You take a look at some of the cities around us. Some of them are in far worse shape than we are. The rec center losses, which we all know about. Property taxes have gone down due to the general decline in property values throughout the area. Income taxes have gone down. We have fewer people working, making less money, that therefore results in less income taxes to the city. Our expenses continue to, just as yours at home, your expenses continue to go up, and so do the city's expenses, and overall reduced revenues across the board. Our health insurance expenses and insurance premiums continue to climb. And until we passed the recent trash levy, we were subsidizing about $150,000 out of the general fund just to pick up trash. But the passage of the levy, it's now a standalone expense and it no longer impacts our general fund. However, as a result of the general fund balance dropping to the low level that it did, and so precipitously, our Moody's bond rating was reduced from AA2 to AA3. We fell down one notch. This was as a result of a series of meetings and arguments and discussions that we had with Moody's. They were actually talking about dropping us even lower, but we were able to convince them that two things. We've added to our general fund balance, and we are committed to finding additional revenue to enhance the bottom line. And so therefore, given the explanations that we gave to Moody's, they agreed to only drop us from AA2 to AA3. I don't know if you can read that, but we are still in that second tier. If you can't read it, I'll read it to you. It says, an obligor has, quote, very strong capacity to meet its financial commitments. It differs from the highest rated obligors only in a small degree. So Moody's still has us rated very high, but that's conditioned on those two things, that we will continue to maintain a strong general fund balance, and we will continue to focus on finding ways to build up our revenue. Without those two things, we will no doubt see another drop in our Moody's bond rating, which affects our ability and cost to borrow, just like your credit rating. So what were we doing in this time to try to shore things up to make sure that we were going to be able to get through those last few tough years? Well, as you probably recall, we did some employee buyouts. We offered a program where people close to retirement could receive a lump sum of money, buy out their contract. They receive a lump sum, we pay something less, everybody comes out ahead. We did some staff reductions, particularly in service, and we'll talk a little bit about that at the rec center. We did some layoffs, that also at the rec center. We streamlined every single operation at the recreation center. Everything was rewritten, all the job descriptions were redone. We are now operating the rec center with only 2 full-time staff members. Everybody else at the rec center is a part-time employee. We have had to focus on fewer capital expense projects, and for 3 years, in the years 2011, 2012, and 2013, we held the line on raises to our union employees. We actually went to fact-finding in, I believe it was 2013, on the prior 2 years, and we were able to successfully argue at that point that because of the financial condition of the city, there should be no raises to our union employees. So I see some frowns here, and I'm sorry. But we were able to convince the fact finder that for those 3 years, there should be 0% raises across the board for all of our unions. However, that had to be renegotiated again when the next 3-year contracts came up. And for the years 2014, 2015, and 2016, raises were negotiated at the rate of 3%, 2%, and 1% in each of those years. So arguably, over that 6-year period, give or take, on an average, it's about a 1% increase over the span, per year, over that span of 6 years. We adjusted health contribution caps to limit the city's contribution for health care. We did the debt restructuring, which I'm about to go into some detail with, basically taking advantage of the time value of money, pushing back some of our debt so that it didn't hit us up front, but recognizing that there's a price to pay that down the road. Our non-union employees accepted unpaid furlough days, some of them a couple dozen days, or as much as that many. We continually are searching for grant monies. And obviously, if you've been watching the news, we're always looking at finding ways to enhance the business development of the community. So let me talk a little bit about the effect of the 2013 trash removal and why that was so critical to what we were doing. In 2013, our cost of trash removal was just under $1 million. The levy at that point in time was only generating about $630,000, and so therefore what that means is that other $330,000 has to be paid from somewhere. In this case, that comes out of the general fund. Hence, the general fund starts to diminish because there isn't enough levy money to pick up the trash. It has to be paid for somehow, and so it comes out of savings. And again, you see, that was the subsidy for 2013. With the passage of that levy, it's fully paid for. It does not come out of the general fund any longer, and we're able to shore up at least that bleeding from coming out of the general fund. A little bit about the debt restructuring I mentioned. We hired a firm from Columbus, very well regarded, George K. Baum. We refinanced certain debt payments from the years for that 17-year period between 2011 and 2028. This happened during the Benkowski administration in mid-2011, June, July of 2011. The total cost to the city of that 17-year restructuring is just under $1 million. And I've got a handout here. I don't have enough handouts for everybody. I'll have to ask you to share. If somebody wants one, we'll make sure and get you one. Yeah, could you get this one? Yes. I'm about to hand out a page out of the George K. Baum restructuring analysis that they did for the city back then. And it basically lays out really two important things. How it was that we were able to get through that 3 or 4 or 5 year period without having to dip into our savings to pay down debt. But you'll see the one column that balances out at 985 after that 17-year period at an average of roughly about $50,000 a year, that's got to be paid. But we would not have been able to get through those top few 4, 5, 6 years unless we did something to reduce our out-of-pocket expenses. And again, that is the definition of the time value of money. You trade time for interest. This allowed the city an opportunity to regroup financially, and as a result, we are now on track, and you just saw what that meant to our reserves. We're now sitting on just under $6 million, arguably, in cash reserves. However, there's always a but. This chart demonstrates the trend of all funds in the city, including the, let me go to the next slide and I'll come back to this one. By all funds, I mean the general fund, the special revenue funds, the debt service funds, capital project funds, enterprise funds, and trust and agency funds. We can go into some detail about that if you're interested, but the point here is, going back to that first chart, as you can see in the year 2012, the balance in all those combined funds was about $5.2 million. In 2013, it went up to about $7.5 million. And last year, we got it up to $10.2 million. So we had about $10.2 million, not just in cash reserves, but all funds. The prediction, however, because of ongoing expenses, and we know that the debt has to be paid that is coming due, the prediction is that at the end of 2015, that $10 million is going to turn into $7 million. And that is a bad trend. Unless we turn that around, that trend is going to continue in the negative aspect. And that's what this meeting is about, to make sure that we all understand that there is a finite point where this must be addressed. What other adjustments did we make? Well, we made some one-time adjustments, and some I've already talked about, but I'll talk in a little more detail, that were used to bring the city from 2010 to 2015, those critical years right after the collapse of the economy. Again, the buyouts, the furloughs, we had a hiring freeze, we weren't hiring people for a while. We sold our cell phone tower revenue. I just had a conversation a few months ago with Mayor DeGeeter in Parma. They're actually hiring the same experts that we engaged to do the very same thing over there. Everyone around us, with the exception maybe of independents, everybody around us is trying to find ways to add to their bottom line. And so you probably read in the paper that the city of Parma is doing the very same thing that we pioneered basically 2 or 3 years ago, using the same experts. And of course, the recreation center restructuring, that was a big, big factor in what we were able to do to get things righted. I want to use as an example some of the costs over the last few years just in one of our departments, because I think it illustrates the overall trend. This is a chart that shows, and we have a handout here as well. This illustrates the fluctuation in costs in the service department, but it's illustrative of departments across the board in the city. Jack, can you save me one? I just need one. Thank you. The front row on the left side is 2011, and it slides over to an estimate of 2015. This is expenses out of the general fund. The handout, I'll just read the numbers to you. The handout will demonstrate that in 2011, out of the general fund, just over $1.2 million. If you look at 2015, here on the right-hand side, that figure is now down to about $775,000. So roughly $500,000 reduced just out of the general fund for the service department. That's as a result of layoffs, as a result of less work being done, as a result of holding off on some of the purchases that the city needs. The next column represents street cleaning, maintenance, and repair. Roughly flat there across the board. In 2011, $667,000, and in 2015, $555,000, so roughly comparable. Sanitary sewers, kind of the same thing, $357,000 in 2011, estimate $250,000 in 2015. Storm sewers actually double, $108,000 in 2011, and in 2015, $201,000. So a year-by-year total is reflected by these green components of the chart in the back. And I'll just illustrate the two on the ends. 2011, $2.4 million. That's this bar here. And estimated for 2015, $1.7 million. This. So this decline is about a $600,000 cut across the board in that 5-year period. We've cut $600,000 in there. You can tell there's some fluctuations in there given any particular year. There's some expenses that escalate and some that go down, but on a trend, it's about a $600,000 decline, and it's because we have to make these cuts. One of the things that we had to cut over there are our personnel. We are now down to 13 full-time employees. We want to hire some, but right now we have 13 full-time employees, down from a high of 20 back in 2011. So we've reduced our staffing there by about 35%. I want to talk a little bit about the financial impact of the rec center on the community. Jack, if you can hand that one out.
Do you need a copy also?
I don't have one. There's no doubt that the rec center is a great facility. Everybody loves it. We get so much use and benefit out of it. It's become a landmark in the city. But there is a price for it. And I want to talk a little bit about that. That price going forward, and this will illustrate that, is about $20 million. The chart, the handout that you're about to see breaks some of that out in pretty tight detail. Everything from original construction and operation all the way through 2014, and at the bottom of the second page, projections through the life of the known expenses, principal and interest payments of the recreation center, not counting any anticipated subsidies and not counting any unanticipated repair work. So if you take a look at the top of the first page under breakdown summaries, The two right-hand columns that run vertically, one says city cost totals and one up next to it says resident cost totals. The resident cost totals are primarily the levy, principal and interest on the levy. The others are other expenses that the city pays, but you're paying it anyway. It's either your left pocket or your right pocket, but this is all taxpayer money. So, land acquisition, Summit View Drive, those two alone, $229,000 plus another $1,006,000. City contributions to construction were another $1 million. Bonds and interest paid through 2014 under the levy were in the right-hand column there, $7.1 million. As you're probably aware, we had to rip off the roof in the first couple of years over the natatorium and redo the whole thing and rehabilitate it. That was borrowed money. I have a handout on that. The handout you're about to be given is substantially the same, but in more detail, illustrating the rec center roof rehabilitation bonds and interest and other costs associated with the rebuilding of the roof. And I'm sure you've all heard this history before. Soon after it was opened, it was found that the roof was defective, it had to be closed, and the roof had to be torn off and replaced. The contractor filed bankruptcy and ultimately, I believe, wound up in prison and is actually no longer alive. The city then had to go after the subcontractors. And through their insurers, the city was able to collect back roughly $1 million of the total $3 million expense of redoing the roof. The remaining $2 million had to be borrowed and put into the rec center to replace the roof, and we are paying interest on that $2 million. And that is what is illustrated by this single-page handout you've just been given. If you take a look at the bottom, interest thus far paid through 2014 is $335,000 and change. The remaining interest to be paid is another 2.7, and principal is another $2.7 million. So we've got just under $3 million left to go just on the problem with the rec center roof. Now, if you take a look farther down, the city's total operating profit / loss 2002 to 2014, you'll see that $3 million figure with the little minus sign in front of it. That's the subsidy for the last 13 years out of the general fund. As I said, when the rec center was built, it was predicted to lose, and it was acceptable that it would do so, $250,000 a year. Well, as I just mentioned earlier, now with the big cuts that we've made, we're actually trending below that figure. We got it down to 238, but only because the last 3 years have been so small. Farther below that, you'll see the energy improvements that we are currently installing. And that takes us down to the actual costs through 2014. Under the city column, $5.6 million. Under the resident column, $7.1 million. So actual out-of-pocket to date is roughly, $12.7. Now the known anticipated expenses going forward make up that remaining $8 million. The interest on the bond payments for construction of Summit View and Civic Drive, another $1.1 million. The original rec center construction bonds, 2015 through 2020, under the residence side, that's an additional $3.1 million. And then you'll see at the bottom there, roof center rehabilitation bonds, interest and payments due from 15 through 30. That's that $2.7 million remaining to be paid. If you take a look at the second page, we continue to find additional problems at the rec center. The most recent issue, after the replacement of that defective humidification unit on the top of the rec center, was about a $500,000 repair, which we didn't have. Leaves us with having to fix some other problems in the rec center that were left over from the time of its construction. There were no vapor barriers installed in the building. Vapor barriers are designed to prevent the transfer of moisture between walls in the building, and particularly to the outside walls. They were just never installed. So the estimates that you see at the top there, that $245,000 basically, that's the anticipated cost, an engineer's estimate to do those repairs. It's not an actual bid. This is an engineer's estimate. The bid likely will be higher, but that's what the estimate of the engineers is at this point. Then underneath that, you see the energy savings guaranteed under the Renew Energy project, and you'll note there that that's a wash. We are anticipating to recover all of that expense over time as a result of the energy upgrades that we put in. New boilers, new lighting. We're now, for example, using a lot of ultraviolet light to sanitize the water instead of relying exclusively on chemicals. And over time, it's anticipated that that will be a wash. However, you'll see that $511,000 there. That's the cost of replacing that unit on top of the natatorium. So current total estimated future costs off to the right there. Under the city side, another $4 million. Under the resident side, another 3.1. Again, that's the levy money. You carry that down to the bottom, off to the right, and it is an impact of $20 million to our community. Again, a great facility, we love having it, but we need to understand it came at a very substantial price. It's a $20 million impact to all the other things that we need to do in Seven Hills. I think we can skip this one. This basically just illustrates in some more detail some of the larger breakouts of what we just talked about. We've been, in the last few years, even though things have been kind of tight, we've been trying to focus on doing as much street repair as we possibly could. Last year we had about a $3 million project. More than half of that was paid with county money on the Crossview and Ridgewood projects. We were lucky to have that. We will not have that big a project this year, but if you remember, we had some very substantial street repairs going on last year. Without having that project Renew, we could have not replaced that $500,000 unit on top of the rec center. We are making technology upgrades throughout the city, particularly in our police departments, our finance departments, our service department. And we're looking at several necessary security upgrades. Security in this 9/11 world is imperative. It only takes one mistake and we will regret it forever. So we're taking a look at doing things like enhancing our security here at the rec center as well as at City Hall. Also want to mention we were successful in obtaining a $2.4 million grant last year for the Hemlock Creek Sewer Project. We were one of 15 grants funded out of 57 total applicants. Originally we were denied. We went back and filed an appeal. 6 cities filed appeals. Only Seven Hills appeal was granted. As a result, these things are granted points. And as a result, we were granted some additional points. That put us up into the funded category. And as a result, our residents are going to be receiving about $2.5 million to help with the cost of replacing the sanitary lines in this last and largest sanitary project in our community. The argument that, if you're interested, that we presented was that we didn't feel that they had made an adequate assessment of the overall regional impact of the number of 300 and some odd failing septic systems that this project comprised. And one of the categories they look at is there a wider impact of the problem with the infrastructure that extends beyond the boundaries of the city. And in this case, we were able to document that this will affect the entire watershed. And as a result of that, we were able to receive basically 10% of the total amount. They only had 25 million to grant, and we got 10% of that figure. We also received another $150,000 grant this year for street repairs north of Rockside Road. We're going to be doing Essex and Chatham this year with that money. And of course, with the Biltmore project coming online, where we've been able to confirm with our attorneys that the TIF money from that project can be used for a number of improvements in that area, including all of Pinnacle Park. So we're going to be resurfacing the entire length of Pinnacle Park. And if you remember at the time when Rockside Road was put in, the county insisted on forcing us to remove traffic lights along Rockside Road. One of them was at Pinnacle Park. In the mornings when you drive past that area, you'll see 3, 4, 5 cars in a row trying to pull out. We just had a bid opening. They are, for that signal installation, they are in excess of $100,000. But luckily the TIF money off of the Biltmore project will go to cover that. We're going to do some upgrades to the area around the nursing home, landscaping, some signage, the traffic light. We want to take a look at perhaps a little bit of a trailhead. I don't know if you know this, but the West Creek Conservancy District is going to be running a path on the Parma side down into Brooklyn Heights. We're thinking about maybe on Old Rockside putting in some sort of little parking area, little picnic area so people can access the bike hike trail from that location. Do you want me to talk to you about what TIF is? It doesn't matter. I can tell you a little bit about it.
They're having their annual meeting next Tuesday.
Who is?
Next Tuesday, West Creek.
Oh, TIF, tax incremental financing. What that generally means is that a municipality is permitted to take a look at the differential, the incremental difference between undeveloped land, the value of the undeveloped land versus what its value is at the time of the completion of whatever improvement is going on. There's some legal complexities to it. You have to create a district, you have to get the schools involved, you define the district, and the money must be spent to improve and enhance that district. So the tax dollars within a certain period of time, in this case I believe it's 20 years, the tax dollars coming off of that project that would normally go to the county or to the schools or various other agencies besides the city can be drawn off and borrowed against by the municipality. And then over time, as the nursing home pays its taxes, the money that comes in for those taxes is turned around and pays back the borrowing. So it's effectively, in a sense, I don't want to say free money, but it's pretty low-cost money. And we're going to be able to make some pretty substantial improvements by using the fact that this very expensive upgrade is coming into our town. So for 2016, the sky is not falling, but there is more work to do. 2017, 18, 19 is going to be challenging. There's no doubt about it. We've been saying this all along, and it bears repeating yet again. We can get through this year fine. We don't want to get through next year without making some hard decisions about what we're going to do about revenue in Seven Hills. One of the factors that we have to confront in all of this is the age distribution in our town. We are perhaps demographically one of the oldest communities in our area, and I meant to change the colors on this chart, so I apologize that I didn't, because it's a little hard to read. This upper left-hand quarter represents our population over age 65. Roughly 1 in 4 of each Seven Hills resident is over age 65. This lower quadrant represents people age 50 to 65, and the right-hand half represents everybody who's under age 50. This is approximately twice the ratio in other communities around us. We have a lot of great senior residents who built this town, who still live here, who live in the house that they built, they raise their family here, they're active, they participate, we love having them, and we have to understand that that has a demographic impact on how we must operate the city. People as they get older, and I'm one of them too, we start to have more needs. We have medical problems. We have issues with plowing our streets, with making sure that we have access to our homes. Shopping problems. As we get old, our needs increase, but those needs must be respected by the community that they built. And it's important that we continue to focus on that. It has another effect on us in that people who are retired don't necessarily pay income taxes. They're paying property taxes, probably, because we have about a 95% ownership rate, but they're not paying income taxes, and that has an impact. So, where do most of our general fund revenues come from? Roughly 80% of the money in our general fund is derived from one kind of tax or another, and that's primarily going to be income taxes or property taxes, real estate property taxes. And this shows that approximate breakdown in 2014. There's a little give and take here, but roughly 80-some-odd% comes from income taxes, and only about 15% comes from property tax. In this case, if you can't read the little numbers there, $5.2 million in income taxes and $901,000 in property taxes. And I can see a lot of looks around, and I'm always amazed at how people don't know how little of your regular real estate taxes actually go to the city of Seven Hills. And this next slide will illustrate that. And this is off my personal tax bill. You may be a little bit different, but it's the ratios are going to be pretty close. Roughly 64% of your tax money, property tax money, not counting assessments, goes to the schools. Roughly 24% goes to the county and various other agencies. Roughly 10, 11, 12 cents on the dollar actually goes to the city of Seven Hills. So if your tax bill is about $4,000 a year, maybe $500 of that goes to the city of Seven Hills. The rest of it is going elsewhere. And for that, the city is providing all the services that a city must provide to its residents. Income tax is, and this is a little bit different than it was years ago, but income tax now is the lifeblood of a community here in Northeast Ohio. We use RETA, the Regional Income Tax Agency, to provide tax administrative services to the city. There's a fee for that. They collected about $5.2 million in income taxes in 2014. They also pursued delinquent and non-filing taxpayers. They last year identified over $140,000 in unpaid taxes. They filed in 2013 66 lawsuits to collect just under $100,000 for us. And in 2014, they filed about 60 lawsuits to collect another roughly $125,000. So we do pursue people who don't file and don't pay their taxes. So what will the future hold? There's a lot of discussion about whether the 2015 budget is balanced or not balanced. As I explained, what we've been doing for preceding years is pulling off about $250,000 a year that would have gone into the general fund and putting it into the debt retirement fund for the very purpose of beginning to address the debt that we know is going to start escalating in the coming years. So I believe that that is a balanced budget because that's exactly what that money was designated for. Once money is transferred from the general fund into the bond retirement fund, it can't be drawn off again. It must be used specifically for that purpose. My argument was with council that I feel it's more prudent to spend the money out of the bond retirement fund for the very purpose it was designated for. We spent about $800,000 out of the $1.6 million this year, preserving the money in the general fund so that we have flexibility going forward to meet expenses that we know are coming. I didn't feel it was a good idea to give up that flexibility when the money was already set aside in the bond retirement fund for that specific purpose. Now, we have some debate about that, but that was my feeling on it. Again, a short-term solution. These are the kinds of adjustments that we can make in the next 18 months or so, but there's going to be a finite point where these things are no longer available to us, and we're going to have to address the bigger issue. Council is debating that right now. And I can tell you that one of the things that came up that I'm absolutely opposed to are any police layoffs for a number of reasons. We are now the third safest city in Seven Hills based on, in Ohio, based on FBI statistics of a certain size. We're doing this with an antiquated police department. We're doing this with a lot of part-timers and understaffed. And in order to lay off the first full-time police officer, we would have to first, under the union contract, we would have to first lay off all of the part-timers. What the part-timers do is they save the city from having to pay for overtime. If you don't have the part-time officer who's being paid on an hourly basis, now that overtime has to be paid for with a full-time officer. So before you can lay off that, and we're already down one officer in the full-time staff too. Before we can lay off that first full-timer, we have to wipe out all the part-timers. So it'd be penny wise and pound foolish to look at that. I don't want to go into a lot of security details, but I can tell you, for example, and I only say this in a general way, imagine what happens with one OVI arrest. A car is stopped because the driver is intoxicated. I don't want to reveal how many officers are on the road at any point in time, but I can tell you that arrest requires at least 2 officers, and will take a couple of hours to process, because someone has to take care of the car, someone has to take care of the individual who's been arrested, they have to be transported back to the police station, they have to be booked, paperwork has to be done. It's very time consuming and manpower intensive, and we are right up against it. We are straining to continue to maintain those levels of service. Just imagine what it would take with one arrest, just one arrest. I know the police levy was not accepted last year. We may want to take a look at whether we want to look at a service levy this year. And we'll talk a little bit about that. The priorities going forward, revenue. We have to find some way to close that coming gap that we all know we're faced with. That can partially be covered by some additional business investment. You've all heard some of the talk about Rockside Road. There's some things percolating there. We may be hearing something about that, but it's not something we can hang our hat on until we know for sure. We have to continue rebuilding relationships with our neighboring communities. Under the prior relationships, to say the least, they became strained. We are sharing a lot of cross-boundary expenses with some of our neighbors to try to reduce expenses and share some of the efforts with each other. Rockside Road development, infrastructure upgrades. Okay, at this point, I'm going to just kind of put a little slideshow here of some of the conditions we've been finding around town. And I'm going to invite you to hand in those cards if you have questions you want to ask us here, and we'll go through those. I want to thank Council President Ernst. She drove around town and just took some general photographs of some of the conditions around town that really need to be addressed. And that's what this slideshow is about to depict as we talk. Okay, has anybody formulated any questions you want to? Got a card?
No, could I just ask what I have to write on the card? I'll stand up.
I'll break the rule for the first guy. Go ahead.
I have a question, and you explained it to me at my first caucus meeting about a year ago about the taxes. I honestly pay $4,800 a year. I'm retired. I just missed the Homestead Act change back in 2015. I turned 65. My question is, how far back does it, and I have no problem supporting schools and the children, number one, they're our future. But why is 64% going, obviously, to Parma schools? Why was there always less money coming into Seven Hills? You're only getting 12% here. When did that go into effect? Did that ever be adjusted? They help out? Can we partner with anybody to maybe help us out here a little bit?
I'll answer briefly just from my limited knowledge of the history of how all that transpired. Maybe I'll ask our finance director to give us a little bit more explanation on that, since he's got more hands-on with the tax structure. This is all levy-driven. When a levy is passed throughout the school district, we're part of the Parma School District, the levy attaches to our property. We have arguably some of the more expensive housing in the 3 communities that make up the Parma City School District. That was why we had such a difficult time with them previously when we attempted to leave them. We are effectively a cash cow for the Parma City School District. We send far fewer children to the Parma schools than what we consume.
That's part of my point, too.
Yeah.
I understand that.
Right. A few years ago, we actually did an analysis. I think, he's not here this evening, but former Councilman Littlepage did an analysis. it was around $12,000–13,000 that we were sending to the Parma schools for every student that we were sending to the system. We could be sending our kids to St. Ignatius, at that time anyway, for what we were giving the Parma schools. Jack, do you want to talk a little bit about some of the tax? This is Jack Johnson, our finance director.
I don't know a lot about it, except that I know that the distribution of property taxes is set by the legislature. I'm sure everybody is aware of the fact that there have been numerous court cases where the courts have continuously declared that this funding for public schools is not appropriate, it's not adequate, and it needs to be changed. Unfortunately, that change has to come from the legislature. There's nothing that we can do about it, but that's why it's set by the legislature.
Yeah, it was actually declared unconstitutional. The whole system was declared unconstitutional by the Ohio Supreme Court on at least, I think, 2 different occasions. However, there's not been any movement in the state legislature to create any replacement system. So we're sitting with a system that the courts say is unconstitutional, but we're still taxing the same way.
Mayor, I have some information about that. May I?
Yeah, sure.
I contacted a place in Columbus called the 1851 Center for Unconstitutional Taxation. I contacted a center in Columbus, a nonprofit. It's called the 1851 Center for Unconstitutional Taxation. A gentleman there named Maurice Thompson told me after months of chasing him down that, I'm a resident by the way, that they could not help with a legal case even though it may be actionable. That was the interpretation I got from reading between the lines, but that we would have to do a ballot initiative and get 10% of the Parma City School District people to vote, just like you would do if you wanted to repeal something on a local level. You'd have to get 10%. So, if you want more information, you can talk to me if you need. Thanks. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Liz. Other questions? Okay. Well, if you want to... The question is, can we sell more cell phone tower locations? We have an ideal geography. A few years ago, we were approached by a firm that wanted to use our topography to install the cell phone towers. We have 3 in our community, 1 behind Calvin, 1 behind the rec center, and 1 down at North Park, I believe. We derive rent off of those towers. When things became tight, we did what Parma is now doing. We went and marketed the revenue stream. We weren't able to sell the leases for legal reasons, but we were able to sell the cash stream. So what we did, we negotiated a contract whereby we received 1 payment of $200 and some odd thousand, 3 payments of $433,000 for the revenue that's coming in. We got that money up front for the revenue that's coming in on those cell phone towers. Now, as those rental fees come in, we distribute that money back to the person who actually bought it from us, and they make a profit, but we get the money up front. That's part of the reason why we were able to get through these last few years. As I say, Parma is about to do the very same thing. From what I saw in the paper, I think they're getting less per tower than what we got. The other thing that we were able to preserve in those negotiations is something called a co-location fee. And we were just approached by an entity that's talking about doing a co-location. If a new transmitter is installed, repeater, I guess they really are, if a new repeater is installed on one of our existing cell phone towers, we get additional money for that. And we were just approached, I think, a couple weeks ago by a firm that's going to be doing exactly that, so that's going to bring us some additional money. The question is, I mean, if somebody, can we sell more? Sure. If somebody wants to put up more towers, we have all kinds of land. I don't know how many of you know this, but the big flagpole behind the rec center is actually a cell phone tower. That's why it's kind of different color at the top. It's fiberglass at the top to allow the signal to transmit through the skin. Questions further?
Is anything going to be done with the old recreation center?
The old recreation center was closed while Bankowski was there. And the reason that it was closed is that it was falling into disrepair. There were vandals, the roof was leaking, glass was being broken, the HVAC system was in bad shape, mold. One of the things that we've considered is perhaps maybe it could be repurposed to maybe an annex service garage facility. I know that Jack doesn't want to lose the ability to use the service garage in the back. When I was a kid in college, I worked for the service department. That was the service department back then, I don't want to say. We are confronted with a very serious problem at our existing service facility. Maybe Jack could talk a little bit about this. We have millions of dollars of equipment that's effectively stored outdoors. We have a covered canopy behind the old CEI building, and all of our very expensive equipment is parked outdoors. One 10-ton truck, one truck, is $150,000. Jack, do you want to talk a little bit about that? But that's maybe something that we might want to think about doing down there. Maybe there's a way we can get some of that equipment under cover during the worst part of the weather in this area to protect it.
Shouldn't we have been doing this all
Money,
these years?
money, money, money. It's all about money.
Some of the problems that we are facing with the service department is, even in 1980, when I started with the service department, the service department used to be at the end of Mapleview. The problem that we're having is being with the salt consortium, we're not getting salt fast enough. Our salt bins are like 1,000 ton, and actually we need bigger salt bins, and it's just the infrastructure of the service department, having everything out in the open. Other communities have heated garages where they can wash the trucks and maintain the trucks, and but everything being out in open is really taking a toll.
Other questions? I'm sorry, somebody just handed me a card. I actually got a card. I have to clean this one up. Someone is frustrated with beer and wants us to start working on the problem in their backyard. And I'll leave it at that. Other questions?
Answer the one about the deer.
Answer the one about the deer? Please. I can tell you this. This is one of the most contentious problems in our city. Every time this subject comes up in council, I'm going to guess maybe this was your card. Every time this subject comes up in council, it's about a 50-50 split. And we get people from surrounding communities coming in, lobbying council to do one or the other thing. My feeling is that it's a regional problem. Deer don't necessarily recognize the boundaries of Seven Hills. They transit between Independence and the Valley and Seven Hills and Parma. I have, at any point in time, I can go in my backyard and I'll find 10, 12 deer at one time. I only have about a half-acre backyard. I can't plant anything out there. They leave droppings, the dogs roll around in the droppings, it gets pretty nasty. So what we have done, a few of the mayors, we got together, I got together with the mayor of Parma, Independence, Parma Heights, Brooklyn Heights, Broadview Heights, and I know I'm missing somebody. North Royalton. Oh yeah, the biggest, the guy who's the most intense about this. And we've been meeting with ODNR in Columbus. In fact, we have another meeting coming up. We're trying to convince ODNR to step up and guide us on exactly what they think that we can do on a regional basis to try to put some sort of controls over this runaway population. And there's all kinds of intensity about how it should be done and who's responsible. Under the Ohio Revised Code, the state of Ohio has title in trust for the residents, but title to all wildlife in the state of Ohio. So when you see that deer in your backyard, it's actually owned by the state of Ohio. So our argument to ODNR is, why are you not controlling your property? Your property is damaging our residents. You need to do something to control. Until recently, birth control was impractical. But I know in talking to Lucy and a couple other people that it's becoming more and more available in easier ways to administer and in ways that it doesn't get into the food chain. So maybe that's an approach that we can take. The state of Ohio knows that they have a problem in urbanized areas. If you take a look at the ODNR website, the counties in Ohio where hunters are permitted to take the most deer, 4 deer, are all the urbanized parts of the state. So Cuyahoga County, Summit County, Mahoning, Columbus, Cincinnati, all of those areas are where the state of Ohio allows the highest numbers of deer to be taken because they know that that's where the problem is. We are coming to a point in time where ODNR hopefully is going to say something to us that we can actually work with. Perhaps the answer is birth control. I can tell you just as a personal aside, I was pulling out of my driveway the other day on Pleasant Valley and a car came up the road and struck a deer. The car just drove off. This poor animal probably went half the height of this ceiling off the ground, came down and flopped on the sidewalk. The poor animal was just thrashing around and dragged itself off into the woods finally to die some horrible death. It's not fair to the animals either. It strains the population. You certainly don't want your young children, your grandchildren to witness something like that. It's a definite problem. I can tell you that all the communities around us are frustrated with this. My feeling is, because it's a regional problem, we need to get the state of Ohio to do more than they are now. It's not enough for them to just tell us, oh, you need to plant some deer-resistant plants and be done with it. That doesn't work.
How do some of these bigger cities, I know Solon, they seem to manage their deer population. Why are they able to do it and we're not?
Solon, well, again, money number one, but Solon has some very large tracts of undeveloped land. We do not. We're about 95% built up. If you visualize like an aerial view of Seven Hills, there aren't that many public areas that aren't, that are large enough to allow for that kind of thing. You can maybe do something along Rockside Road, maybe where the old radio transmission towers were. But I can't think of too many places where you've got 10, 15 acres of open, publicly held land where you could do that. They are doing it very quietly in the metro parks, and I know that the national parks are actually talking about doing it. It's a question of logistics, space, money, and honestly political will. We have pretty much a 50-50 split in our town, and that's part of the problem.
In that regard, I think my son had mentioned to some of the officers in Seven Hills, he had been in touch with some Amish people who were willing to take deer. Isn't this a feasible kind of a thing, or is this too costly, or why not?
Well, again, that would require hunting, and we don't permit hunting in Seven Hills.
No, but I mean, to transport them down to Amish country.
Oh, to trap them and move them?
Yes. I don't know if this is feasible or not, but
I'm sorry, Lucy? Is that illegal?
It's illegal.
It's illegal? You looked into it, it's illegal? Oh, all right, there's the answer.
I won't tell.
Other questions?
I've just gotten on a first name basis with a long
Well, if you want to put anything on those blue cards and have us get back to you at a later point, we'll be happy to do that. I thank everybody for coming out. I enjoy this kind of thing. It gives me a chance to kind of communicate with people and share ideas and hear what you have to say. And stay tuned, because these issues aren't going to go away, and we're going to have to figure out ways to address them. Thank you, everybody.
That's